Last several weeks, our sermons have been focused on, we've been talking about kind of this theme of identity. And Vicar John last week led us in a sermon challenging us with the sermon title of Who Am I? And led us to the conclusion that we are grace-filled people of God sent into the world to live like that. This morning, this reading takes a slightly different turn from that identity and takes a shift to what is life all about? What is life all about? And uses the two men in this reading which you just heard. Which leads into my homework for you as you were going through there. All right, your circles. How many circles did you find? Speak up. Somebody got it. 10? 20? Well, that's the Latin teacher. I'm going to have to see your notes. All right? 20 in here? I had 14, but like I said, it's in here, all right? But you get the gist. Even if you didn't get that number right, you got the idea here, what's happening. Is both people in this story, or all they're concerned with here is I, me. Going in the story. I got to say, as I was reading down through this story, it reminded me of 2-year-olds, or maybe a little younger than 2-year-olds as they play, right? You've ever seen 2-year-olds or maybe 1.5-year-olds, 18-month kids try to play with others, right? And they got toys out, and what's the most common word that a 2-year-old has when trying to play with others? Yeah, got it. Yeah. Mine. Right? Isn't that what they're saying? Mine. They're sitting there with this mine going in and talking in here that's mine. And it's into this, God steps in and God calls them fools. Calls them fools. It's the same root, by the way, slightly different etymology in here, but the same root as in Greek language as the word moron, by the way. Calls them fools. And he calls them fools because they mistakenly think that title means ownership. They're mistakenly thinking that title means ownership. Because I think what these guys have done, and what we do is easily for us to do, is we divorce the spiritual side and the material side. So if we're sitting here and we're thinking, okay, I'm going to grow in my spiritual life, I'm going to grow in my walk with faith, we kind of shun all the material stuff over here, and we're getting more in prayer, and we're getting more in the spiritual, and we're getting more in this spiritual side of life as it's happening here. Okay? And if we're doing that, we're divorcing ourselves from this material stuff over here. But the only problem is God doesn't do that. God doesn't do that. And you guys just prayed that a minute ago. Right? In the middle of the Lord's Prayer, remember what the phrase you said? We all said together, right? Give us this day our daily bread. God doesn't make that divorce in here. So there's a principle that happens, and it happens from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and continues right to our day today. There's a principle in the Bible that we sometimes forget in here, and it's simply this. God is the owner. God's the owner. God's the owner of everything. And these guys in this story, both of them, by the way, the guys in the story right here, forget that simple fact that God is the owner. So it's his land, his crops, his good, his homes. You may have the title on things, but he's the owner. You may have possession, and it may be in your barns, but he's the owner. It belongs to him, and he's loaned it to us in here. And see, this is where that spiritual side comes in. right? Again, where it gets mixed up together, right? Because this God who's the owner, and the owner of the stuff that we have, this God who is the owner here, is the same God that we heard just a minute ago say, I forgive you all your sins. He's the same God here who came to his table and he fed us with his body and blood. It's the same God as that sit here and talks to us and he says, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. It's the same God we sit here when our lives are coming apart and we desperately need God. He's the one. That's the same God. Which begs the question, then, what are you doing with God's stuff? What do you do with God's stuff? Do you see the stuff that you have? Do you see it as mine? Or do you look up and say, yours? Because there's a difference in attitude there. Do you hoard it like the rich fool? Or are you looking ways to share it in here? Is life eat, drink, and be merry? Or to use it to wash feet? Get the reference? You heard me say it before, right? John chapter 13, Jesus comes, and what little he has, he takes off and gets down and washes the disciples' feet. And then gets up and he sits there and says, as I have washed your feet, go and do likewise. Do we see the things that God has given in this world, not only the faith and the love and the grace we have, but the material blessings he's given to us? Do we see those things as things that God gives us to go out and wash feet? That's the question. But there's another issue going on in this story in here. It comes in this nature of relationships. So I want to take you back now to the first part of this story. If you look in your bulletin in here a second, as you go back to the first part of this story. And this story starts off, man comes up to Jesus and he sits there and says, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Now remember, understand something. He's not doing, this is not what he's saying, right? He's not coming up to Jesus and saying, Jesus, if you would, please. I'm having a disagreement with my brother. Would you please make peace with us? Help us make peace? Would you help us reconcile with my brother? Would you help me and my brother to come to a conclusion here that's right? He's not saying that. He comes in here and he says, first of all, he's demanding, which is a scary thing sometimes, right? Demanding things of Jesus. He's coming in here, he's demanding of Jesus, and he's demanding here and says, Jesus, the relationship with it's his older brother, with my older brother is irreparably broken. What I want you to do is help me build the wall in the canyon between us. I want you to help make this canyon. This is not an attempt at reconciling. This is open warfare with his older brother. And so Jesus responds with another story. A story about the rich fool. And he starts off this story in the rich fool, and you caught that in the eyes and stuff. But notice in here is some of those things in here, the rich fool's talking to himself, right? He's talking to himself about what he's going to do. The only problem is that's not how it's supposed to work in his day. Because in this day, men of this man's stature don't do anything of themselves. What he should have done, what culture would have dictated and said, he would have gathered with his peers, he would have gathered with his friends, and they would have gathered and they would have sat down at the city gates or sat down under a quiet, shady oak tree or a big tree or something, and he would have sat there and he would have talked to his friends and said something like this. He would have said, God has really blessed me. God has rained his blessings upon me. And I don't know what I'm going to do with all these blessings. I'm thinking about building a barn, a bigger one. What do you think? And they would have talked and talked and talked and talked and talked and talked and talked some more. And out of that community, the rich man would have come up with an answer. But notice he doesn't do that. The only person he has to talk to is himself. Both of these men have the same issue. They're alone. They're lonely. They're isolated in this world, in their world. Today in our world, we have more communication tools than ever before. And we have less communicating with each other. We have more social media outlets and more social media venues going in and in this world, and people are feeling more and more isolated in this world. You heard me say this before, as it sits there and says, Facebook is not a substitute for FaceTime. And we tend to do that sometimes. We need people in our face. We need real people in our faces that we can reach and touch and talk to and know what's going on, and they know what's going on. We need real people in our lives. Several years ago, I was teaching at a district event. And as we had the district event gathered, one of our break times going in, there was a bunch of us sitting on the floor, kind of in a free-flowing discussion going in here. And one of the girls is sat there in the group. She was talking, and she starts off, she's in the middle of the sentence. She says, I have this friend, not a real friend, a Facebook friend. Now, pause here a second. You can have real friends on Facebook, okay? But you get what I'm talking about. I have a friend, not a real friend. And it was like a club upside of my head. Real friends. That's what we're looking for. Is real friends in life. Real friends. What are the real friends? Real friends are those people in here that see us with all our ugliness, all our warts, all our flaws, all our mistakes. Real friends are those people who look at us and can see that we let them see the disfigured side of us, that side of us that we hide behind masks. You know what it means when I masks, right? You're sitting there and people will come up to you and they'll say, "How's things going?" You go, "Fine." Right? And you're waiting for the next question. Let me give you a hint here. You want to cut past that, all right? I've done it with some of you guys at times, right? People will look at you and you'll go, "How's things going?" You go, "Fine." You want to cut beyond it, you go, "So how are you really doing?" Okay? People ask the question, "How are you really doing?" And people you can share that with, how you really doing in life. People that sit there in the midst of things can sit there and know what's going on in your world. In here, real friends. Real friends is going in here as I was describing what real friends are, okay? Because there's times in our lives, right? Are times in our lives when our lives simply come apart. And I've talked with people that have been through there, and I'm sure you have too. Their lives just kind of come apart. And many times they'll come apart in life because of what's called the 3 I's. The 3 I's. Things that are illegal, immoral, or idiotic. And they'll do one or a combination of the 3 I's. Illegal, immoral, or idiotic. And their lives come apart in life, okay? And to a person, what they'll sit there and say is somewhere through it, in the middle of it, or afterwards, somewhere what they'll say is this. You find out who your real friends are. We need real friends in our world. And so I'm going to ask you here. You don't have to show hands if you don't want to, okay? Who needs that kind of real friend? I'll raise mine. Okay, some people can. All right? But I'm willing to bet that if you don't have your hands up, we got this Lutheran thing, right? It's okay. Okay? Because even though your hand may not be up, I see it up in here. God calls us, we need the real friends in our world. But here's the flip side of this coin in here. He calls us, we need these real friends in our world, but he calls us to be this kind of friend. To be this kind of friend to people. People sit there and come up to somebody and say, so how you really doing? People are willing to see flaws in people's life and the hurts and the warts, see the disfigurement, see beyond the mask, and sit there in people's lives and say, yeah, and say, friend. Friend. Because in many ways it's simply an echo of what Jesus has done in our lives, right? Because it's Jesus in here. Jesus is the one who comes into our life, and he sits there and says, friend, I see your flaws. I see your warts. I see your mistakes. I see how your disfigurement. I see the rotten things you've done. I see the immoral, the illegal, and idiotic that you've done in our life. And what I call you is friend. I call you friend. With all the grace and love that word brings. And you've already done this. But he sat there and he said, and friend, come to my table. He said, come to my table. And you did. And you stood here among friends. And you stood here among people who call you friends in this relationship. And it's not simply the people who are in this building this morning. It's these friends from the time gone by who God calls friends. We stand here with us as part of friends. God brings us into this. Stories about what is your life about. It's about friends. It's about friends. Looking around to the people sitting next to you and sitting around and calling them friends. But then looking. Everybody, don't look at me, look at the cross. And realize he's the one who calls you friend. Amen.